My name is Leslie Koch, and this is part of my story. So my journey with OKC Community started long before it was ever a church. So around 2011, 2012, I was attending a church in Norman. I was finishing grad school, and I was just in this season of transition in my life. And I'd become really close with Tim and Christy and their girls, just from knowing them from church. Their friendship to me during that season meant more to me than they will ever know. 10 years, 12 years later, I just know that God knew that I needed them. And it was during that time that they decided that they were going to start a church, start OKC Community. The second that I found out that they were doing this, I was like, I am all in. You cannot leave without me. I will go wherever you go. From day one, I was just kind of around. Like I was just always there. I think I legit tricked my way onto this staff, truly. It's like, what do you need help with? I can help you with the logo. I knew how to build a website, so I helped build our website. I would watch their kids while they went to meetings, and then we would like stay up till 1 a.m. working on their living room floor, just trying to get things off the ground. Those early years of our church were some of the sweetest memories of my life. It was truly just a group of people who were genuinely saying yes to Jesus. If you knew me in those early years, what you saw was probably a girl who was like a really hard worker, always willing to serve, always saying yes. But what you didn't see was someone who was covering up a lot of deep, deep pain. My whole life, I've just been one of those kids who was like pretty timid and pretty shy. I always felt a little bit different. You know, you take someone who already had a pretty fragile self-esteem, and then I ended up in some pretty toxic friendships and dating relationships early on in my teenage years and early 20s that were really formative in my life. They just really treated me not great, and it made me believe really terrible things about myself for most of my life. I felt like really hard to love, too loud even though I like never spoke, too big, I like took up too much space even though I was like starving myself most of my life to be smaller, too emotional even though I like pushed a lot of that down. I just spent so much of my life like really working to like earn love and acceptance because I was just desperate to feel it for myself. And so I would constantly like overcommit. I didn't want to let anyone down ever because I was afraid of what they would think of me. About 6 years ago, I hit an all-time low. I had a really rough year of just a lot of disappointment and rejection. I just felt really alone. It was almost like, okay, maybe this is all true. Like maybe I really am hard to love. Not only was it impacting the way that I thought about myself, but it was impacting my relationship with God. It was never like I doubted God was real. It was like he was just real for everybody else, and he had forgotten me. We were having a night of worship, and I remember exactly what chair I was sitting in. I was in the back row. Tim was praying, and I don't even remember exactly what he said, but it was to the point of like listening to God and asking for God to speak to you. And I just remember being like, okay, God, well, I'm here. Like, would you show me something? Show me anything. We went back into worship, and all of a sudden, I have no idea how else to explain it, but it was like I was in a movie scene, and I was like a little girl, and I was just surrounded by dirt and holding these gardening tools. I don't even know how to garden, but I was holding these tools, and right in front of me was like the deadest, like saddest, driest plant you've ever seen. Then all of a sudden, like, God is just right next to me. He takes the tools and he stands me up. All the dirt is gone, all the bruises, all the things that I'd been like battling with trying to keep this plant alive. I look up and I'm standing in this field of like the most beautiful wildflowers. There's like mountains in the back. It's like golden hour. It's like the most picture perfect scene, and we're walking. I told no one. I kind of freaked out, and I went home and I just sobbed, and I felt so seen by God. He was telling me, like, you've been keeping yourself in the dirt. The life that you want, I've already given it to you, and I'm gonna help you walk in it. And I remember even being like too afraid to like believe it. So I just prayed, and I was like, God, if that was you, make it clear, like make it so I can't deny it. For the next year, it was like God literally like massively changed my life. I had tons of more visions like that. People would call me in the middle of the night like they had dreams that they felt like God needed to tell me something. And it was stuff that only God could have told them. From the outside looking in, you may look at me and be like, nothing looks different, but I'm a completely different person. I was afraid to pray. I felt unqualified to speak, to lead. I was a pastor at this church and I felt those things deep down. Now I pray all the time. It's like my favorite thing to do, to be able to pray with people. I preach all the time. I lead multiple groups. I basically never stop talking. It just comes from this place of not like, oh wow, look at me. It's like, look at what God has done in my life. My story is just one story of how God has been moving in this place. God has done a lot of miraculous work in our church, physical healings, but a ton of emotional healings too, just like mine. I just know and believe that God wants to do more if we will just continue to trust him and give him a chance to keep surprising us.